everybody, Jason Burmis here for wearechange.org, and with less than 72 hours to go, the Bilderberg conference has been announced in location and attendee list. And some of those names on the list, I got to admit, are a bit of a surprise, while others are definitely not. I am joined by Tony Gosling, somebody who has been following this for many years now, somebody who actually was looking into this in the days of Jim Tucker. And we were lucky enough to talk to Tony a couple weeks ago about this upcoming conference with little to no knowledge about it. But now we know, beginning in Thursday in Switzerland, we will have Bilderberg 2019. So, Mr. Gosling, thank you for joining me. And I have to ask you, what are your first impressions of this list?
Well, I mean, I know, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the list to me is a kind of peripheral, really. I'm fascinated by whatever subjects it is that they're talking about. And also, I love to read between the lines when they write those subjects out. Obviously, the list is important. There'll be new faces and old faces on there, surprises. There's always a few surprises. But the thing that really jumps out to me about this is they're back in Switzerland again. Okay, so they're back in French Switzerland. This really is Bilderberg heartland. And, of course, it's Nazi heartland because much of the planning around the second or during the Second World War and the money laundering that was going on right here. So you can just imagine, if you want, Alan Dulles and his chums sitting up on top of the Swiss Alps, rubbing their hands as more money is rolling in, and as the Second World War is raging around them. This part of the country, I mean, just looking at this area around, it's a sort of line of latitude around North Switzerland. We've had other conferences, Bilderberg conferences here, but that's not all that's there. I mean, you've got in Austria, one of the most recent ones in this zone in Tyrol, but you've got things like Hitler's Bormann's Eagle's Nest, Über Salzburg, and just near there you've got the place where the Nazi Party was formed in Munich.
And Tony, can I just stop you
nearby.
for 1 second there? You know, a lot of people don't understand what Eagle's Nest is. Why don't you tell people what that is?
Well, this is where we've seen most pictures of Hitler, where he's looking out over the mountains. That's where he used to go for his kind of rest and recuperation, and for chatting with the senior high command of the Nazi Party. And I mean, it was more to do with the party rather than the Wehrmacht and the really senior people in the army. But anyway, that whole area I think is a fascinating part of the world. You've got a place where Martin Bormann, his wife, lived very close by, which is near, just having a look at my map here, a place called Bolzano, which is not too far away. But that whole zone, I mean, of course, there's also something which I discovered only just a couple of weeks ago, was that Karl von Habsburg, he's the one who's recently come out saying that Brexit is like watching a reality TV show. He's, he was one of the people who started the Pan-European Union in 1923, which was the mission to unite Europe as one single state, that is the United States of Europe. That's a mission which is foundering at the moment, but it's causing enormous trouble and chaos in Europe and a lack of democracy as these technocrat prime ministers and technocrat chancellors are installed around Europe. That also started in Munich in 1923, not long after the formation of the Nazi Party. That's another thing, in this zone. Admittedly, that's a little distance away. It's the other side of Lake Constance. But, there's just so much here. This is where the mission to get Martin Bormann out of Nazi Germany at the end of the war was conducted by the British Secret Services, really in order to get the guy who had the signatures to the bank accounts in Switzerland, which had so much of the money. So I think it's, I mean, I know, the list is important, but I just think it's fascinating that they've actually come back here again.
And let me say something else.
We've had Switzerland before. We've had Austria and Switzerland in recent years, but this shows to me. I mean, there was some speculation about it being Turkey and Canada and various things, and there was reasons for those speculations. But this is safe country for them, and it was great to see the. I don't know if you follow the All Smoke and Mirrors blog, Manfred Petrisch's blog. He spent a lot of time in Switzerland, and he's now in Abkhazia over on the Black Sea, blogging about Bilderberg. He's one of the first people to do a really good article about this year's conference after having got the information which came out in one of the Swiss newspapers. But he calls this a home game. That's what he calls it. So he's got lots of supporters, mostly Swiss-German supporters, who will be going down there to make sure they get snaps of every single Bilderberger as they come out and try and get into this hotel, hiding themselves away, trying to make sure no one even notices them.
And you just mentioned the vicinity of important things. One of the things that I saw that just kind of shocked me a little bit is its closeness in the general vicinity of CERN. And we know that CERN actually went to their first Bilderberg meeting in 2017 on the heels of them announcing that they would be building a much larger Large Hadron Collider to kind of take the place of this one that's, searching for the quote-unquote God particle, and tells us about the Higgs boson. And with all of, the quantum computing, the artificial intelligence, now the ethics of artificial intelligence on the agenda this year, with many of these new technological elites coming up. One of the names that caught my eye was a guy named Jared Cohen, who is a executive over at Jigsaw, aka Alphabet, and in 2014 he authored this book, The New Digital Age, with Eric Schmidt, who is now back on the list after a couple years of supposedly being absent. I guess that you're not reading too much into that list, but do you think that we can?
No, I do. I just thought I'd start by talking about a bit of the history. Mm-hmm. I mean, also near Zurich was the home of the Reinhard Gehlen, very important figure, who was a Nazi intelligence officer who was immediately brought in to work the day before the official surrender for NATO as part of Operation Sunrise. This is I just think it's interesting to try and take another look at the zone where they are, the werewolves, the Gladio werewolves, the fascist cells, which were started by the Nazis at the end of the war as stay-behind forces, and then incorporated into NATO in the 1980s and 90s, creating the strategy of tension, which has, I think, influenced so much this whole war on terror and the creation of ISIS that we've seen today, these kind of fake fascist cells pretending to be kind of Soviet units, pretending to be Muslim extremist units, and this manipulation of warfare using proxies. This was something also that was cooked up in Bern, at Her Majesty's Secret Service, the James Bond film, filmed not far down the road near Lake Neuchâtel. So it's that kind of thing I think I like to look at as well. The Tower of Basel, very close by, which is where the central bankers of the world meet up once a month to decide our fate. This is just the central bankers deciding and regulating the global money system. Basel's literally a stone's throw from Lake Neuchâtel, which is the next lake down. So, that's one of the things I like to look at as to Switzerland is a safe territory for them, but I don't think it's going to be totally safe, what with Manfred and his little platoon of photographers who will be looking at them. But you're quite right to focus on absolutely bang up to date, the modern stuff, which is their obsession with controlling technology. You're absolutely right about that, Jason, and that's exactly what they do. They want to control the future. They believe the future is going to be able to be controlled by technology through AI. And it did make me laugh to see them talking about the thing that made me laugh the most about it was the weaponization of social media. Mm-hmm. This topic for conversation, they really are taking the mickey. They're having fun with us by putting this on there, because of course social media is something that they have largely developed. The Bilderbergs have financed Peter Thiel and people like this, and had at the Bilderberg conferences, through the years. This is a creature of theirs, and so although they're talking about the weaponization of social media, they own it and they control it pretty much.
Yeah, and when you talk about a guy like Thiel, this is the president's acting technology advisor, and obviously Kushner being on this list is making waves all around. But the return of Schmidt on the heels of him supposedly leaving Alphabet altogether, other than being a technological advisor, I think, at this point. Remember, he stepped down as the CEO of Alphabet back in 2017 when he thought he was going to be caught up in a Me Too scandal. Then he was on the board. Then he stepped down from that. And recently we've seen him in the media trying to placate to the people. It was okay. We were working on this Dragonfly internet browser that was censoring things with China. Don't worry about it. It's actually a good thing. China working with us is positive. And we see China and Russia, Brexit, as some of the main issues. One of the things we did talk about was the turmoil in Europe last time. Did you think that Theresa May would be stepping down last week? And, are we going to see one of her successors at this meeting?
I would imagine it's quite feasible that somebody, I would guess actually that Boris Johnson may well be there, but not on the official list. Mm-hmm. This is something that, people often criticise me for saying this, but I've absolutely cast iron proof that the Prime Minister Tony Blair was at the 1998 conference. I went up there, I spoke to people, I spoke to a woman that served him breakfast, but he wasn't on the list. This is the way they do things. If there's somebody that would be very politically sensitive, they make sure they're not on there. There are some pretty strong hints that Mike Pompeo is going to be at this meeting, even though he's not on the official list. So Boris Johnson is almost a shoe-in for the replacement of Theresa May. He's a Bullingdon club boy, friend of George Osborne and David Cameron. Well, I say friend. They were in this cult in Oxford together, and anyone that wants to, check that out with Nathaniel Rothschild, with various other, well-known people who, well, actually not so necessarily so well-known. Jonathan Ford's one of them. He's the leader writer for the Times. For the Financial Times. This kind of thing is the way the Brits have cooked things up over the years at Oxford. If you're in this club, you go around and you smash things up. George Osborne will turn up the next day with a checkbook and just make sure all the repairs are paid for. And you can do what you want. And also, as part of that, you're told, well, you're going to be running the country when you're older. And the thing is that the point of doing this is a kind of bit like Skull and Bones or something, I guess, in the United States, is these sorts of, it's not quite a formal secret society, but those who are controlling things from behind the scenes or steering events, the people with the power and the money, know that they need to have people out up the front who are in front of the camera these days on the TV live, on the rolling news channel explaining things, and they want to make sure that those people are owned by them, and they do that by getting them into all sorts of trouble as youngsters, promising them great things, and then making sure that they've got plenty of dirt on them so that they know that they had better toe the line or else there'll be trouble. Those are the sort of perfect blackmailable politicians that I think Boris Johnson is one of, and so he's almost certainly going to be the next Prime Minister after Theresa May. Actually, I did predict it. It's nice that you ask. And I actually put a picture of a Klingon from Star Trek up about a week ago on Facebook saying, come on, Theresa, can't you take a hint or something? Some sort of silly joke, But anyway, I was quite amazed to see she actually did finally go. It was getting to that stage where I think everyone was feeling, well, that she's just banging her head against a brick wall and all of the rest of the, 65 million Brits with it. So it's time for her to go somewhere else. She wasn't credible. She'd lost all political authority and she was doing things like sacking people just to try and make herself look as if she was in charge. I heard a figure of 36 resignations under her premiership. But of course, she's really just a tool of her husband. This is another thing that's come out, Jason, in the last, just since she resigned. Actually, on the radio on Friday, various people were saying, well, nobody ever really spoke to Theresa May. It was her husband, Philip, that was the go-to person if you wanted to get something done. And her husband, Philip, works for, it's called, is it Capital Services or something? Los Angeles big investment firm. And he's a massive investment broker. So this is a money in charge, really. And so Yeah, Theresa May probably be replaced by Boris. I would guess he may well be there. I'd like to see. I will certainly be having a look this weekend to see if we can see if Boris is actually here in the UK. And it might be that he just nips over for the day or something. But they are definitely prime candidates. The one thing that Bilderberg love to do is to introduce the rich and powerful of the world to their latest blue-eyed boy. And Boris is certainly that here in the UK. I think he's almost certain he'll be taking over.
Well, just to go back to one of the points you mentioned earlier, you were talking about these networks and Oxford in particular. And it was only recently in my research that I came across a man named Neil Ferguson, who is a Hoover Institute historian and also a Rothschild historian, written 2 books on the matter. And he recently, in the last couple years, wrote a book, I believe it's called The Tower and the Square, and it's about these secretive organizations, social networks, if you will, all the way from the Freemasons to Facebook today. And he acknowledges in an interview with Brian Lamb on C-SPAN that these networks absolutely exist and that he is a recurring member in the Bilderberg group. And what this tells me is that Neil has kind of become their historian, their PR man, to promote their agenda in an academic fashion while kind of obfuscating the negative aspects of globalization that they're working towards, Tony.
Yeah, it's very manipulative. Yeah, he's pronounced Niall Ferguson. Yeah, he's basically doing, as we've seen with so many other things, he's doing the, should we say, official version of this book. It'd be nice to see. I mean, actually, I've been doing a book over the last couple of years, and I'm having trouble actually getting it published. But that will be the kind of unauthorized version, if you like, of what he's done. So what they try and do is they always try and get stuff out, literature out, because they have absolutely no problem themselves, because they control many publishing networks, like people like Rupert Murdoch do. And so they realise what they're most afraid of is somebody like, I mean, I hate to say it, but somebody like my book coming out and doing well is going to expose them. So what they do is they'll get someone like Niall Ferguson to put out a book about secret societies and these networks, which is going to be very tame. It won't go for the jugular, and it will not expose the, seriously cult-like nature of these organisations. And of course, the cults have been around for centuries, probably thousands of years. And this is just a kind of, I suppose, I mean, having not read his book, I very much doubt if he's really exposing what's going on. But secret societies, absolutely. I mean, Bilderberg is a secret society. That is the way they operate. Even if you, as one of the non-initiated, get invited along, as some do, like Will Hutton did when he was the editor of The Observer back in the 1990s, you're instructed that you are not allowed to talk about anything specific and put it onto a specific person. So you're allowed to discuss what they want you to discuss, but you're not allowed to identify who is driving events. And of course, if you were allowed to do that, you would find that it would be people like the bankers, the financiers, who are driving things. And you're not allowed to, really paint a proper picture of what's going on in there. And it is absolutely appalling, Jason, that our politicians and our journalists go along to such a meeting where they are privy to specific people who are trying to drive events and have the power. Most of the money in the Western world is controlled by the people in that conference. There's a vast concentration is going on of wealth right now, and sucking away of the wealth from ordinary Americans, ordinary Britons, ordinary Europeans into their personal private coffers. And this is happening as well through the results of the financial bailouts in 2008. Which was basically, I would describe as the biggest heist in history. What happened is we paid for the crimes of the bankers, and nearly £1 trillion in dollars and pounds was sucked out of the government and into the hands of the bankers. And what happened? Well, we had then zero interest rates since then, so nobody who wants to put their savings is going to put them into the safe banks. Everyone has had to speculate now in investment funds and on the stock exchange and that sort of thing. So, but the trouble is the stock exchange is really, we've been forced into the casino by these people, and I'm absolutely clear, 100% clear. When I don't know, it could even be this year, at some point that casino will crash, and all that money will go, it'll be a great big sucking sound, and all that money will go from ordinary people into their personal private hands, and they will clean up on us. And I think that's actually what's going on right now, and it's appalling that the journalists do not explain this. They don't explain what's going on in the euro-dollar zone to the public, and neither do the politicians. They're actually in on it, and they're in effectively a secret society which is quite fast turning into looking much more like a criminal conspiracy to rob all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're going to be on the ground. In fact, Luke is currently at the airport right now waiting to take off to get into Switzerland. It obviously was not cheap, only doing it on less than 48 hours notice from people coming in there. But we want to thank everybody who helped out on the GoFundMe. We actually exceeded our expectations. Tony Gosling, I thank you so much for breaking that down. Where can people find your work?
Well, I mean, we'll be covering it live on Friday on the radio in Bristol. I mean, it's worth saying that the Israeli Foreign Ministry tried to take our programme out earlier this year using the British Broadcasting Regulators Ofcom through an organisation called UK Lawyers for Israel. But no, we're still there. We're still broadcasting in the city of Bristol, which is, of course, where John Cabot sailed to start the process of creating this state of the mass genocide of Native Americans. This is also, I think, a Templar port, Bristol, and that's where we broadcast. The idea is we get politicians in to talk, local politicians, about local affairs, but then we also look at the bigger picture. And of course, you can't do that as the mainstream media, the mainstream news do. I was in conversation on email with the foreign correspondent for Channel 4 News today, Lindsay Hilson, who was saying, I don't want to know about this Bilderberg conference on email. And I said, well, why not, Lindsay? It affects every single story that you do, both war stories and financial stories. So why don't you want to know? Why don't you just go and cover it this once? So anyway, I pleaded with her, Jason. I'm not holding my breath. But, that's what they don't do on the mainstream media. So we do it at least for a Bristol audience, and people can tune in online. You can find us at thisweek.org.uk, or if you happen to be in Bristol, you can listen to us on 93.2 FM. That's between 6 and 8 every Friday evening. Or you can find the forum. So lots and lots of discussions on there, and a lot of my information about assassinations, mysterious deaths, and all sorts of dodgy events over history, and much, much more, and including all sorts to do with, the war on terror and individual terrorist events, like, for example, the Christchurch massacre, the hideous, disgusting blowing up of people in church on Easter Sunday this year in Sri Lanka, which now looks as if it was almost certainly the Saudis, and that means, of course, the West and NATO and Israel behind that bombing. And that's at 911forum.org.uk. But I suppose I'm most well known for the Bilderberg.org website, because I set that up back in 1996 because I was broke and I was squatting at the time and no money. But I managed to get some money off of one of the sister of one of Henry Kissinger's goddaughters, in order to buy the domain and set up the first Bilderberg.org website, which now has a forum on it. And you need to just go to Bilderberg.org, and you can see all the discussions and all the news articles to do with this year's conference, Jason, and maybe even this YouTube when it goes up.
All right, sounds so good. And remember, Tony is going to be one of a handful of people, literally, in the world that is going to be covering this very important conference with people like...
We'll definitely be covering it live. We've got several people going to be there, so we'll be having some live discussions and live reports from Bilderberg on Friday.
Yep, and along with people like Dan Dix, Press for Truth, he's on his way there. Truth Streams is going to be covering it, but not on the ground. And, of course, we're going to be covering it. Hopefully, we're going to stay in touch over the weekend, going over some of the power moves. And hopefully, Luke's going to be confronting these guys on the ground, as he has done year in and year out. Guys, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you on the flip side.
Cheers, Jason. Just really last final thing is Mike Pompeo. If he is there, it looks as if he may well be. It's quite clear he's there to sell this whole Iran is the latest evil empire. We must have a regime change in Iran, and of course that must be covered by the international press. This is a potential World War III he's cooking up in Switzerland this weekend, so he needs to be exposed. He's a Christian Zionist lunatic. Effectively, in his mind, war looks good. Goodness knows how he works that one out as a Christian. I've no idea. I think that maybe he's got his theology a little bit twisted.
I couldn't agree more, and actually that's something I discussed with both Aaron Dykes about the Iranian situation and Robbie Martin of Media Roots just the other day. So I couldn't agree more, and maybe that'll be the follow-up video talking about the possibility of World War III kicking off in the Gulf with this latest situation with Iran. Again, we thank Tony Gosling, and remember, folks.
Cheers, Jason.
Thank you. If you want to get out there and be the change you want to see in the world, it's the only way we're going to make a difference. Thanks again.